Hello, everyone. Tom Fox back with Scott Endicott and Ben Locwin for our first episode in our five-part podcast series. Gentlemen, first of all, welcome back, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me on this second series.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, the pleasure's all mine.
If it's not apparent to everyone, healthcare is an ever-changing landscape. And what I wanted to do with y'all's help in this series is to provide some perspective on how insight into patients and healthcare providers can assess changes and advocate for better healthcare. With that, I would say the future is here. Is that a fair statement to begin this podcast series with?
I would say the future is definitely here. For me, the mosaic of pieces all point in the direction of regulatory favorability to getting things approved faster to market. Even if things aren't necessarily approved, at least the FDA reviewing things has been on an accelerated pathway. Some of that, I think, owes itself to the pandemic and things that were developed during that time frame. And I think as some of the topics that we'll delve into, there are certainly new therapies which I would have said a few years ago are on the horizon, but really they're already emergent and they're available for use. So I think from my perspective, we're living in that future where we always say, yeah, in the next 5 years, things are going to look great. We're now in that zone.
No, and to further to Ben's point, we are in a very unique place where healthcare is growing intensely personal very quickly. And really, the goal of these series of discussions is to present and provide options where patients and clinicians, friends, families, caregivers can advocate better. We've all been in those situations, likely with whether it's elder care, whether it's child care, whatever it may be within the healthcare paradigm, where you recognize once you're inside, it's a pretty scary place. It can be a very scary place, even with all the help and opportunity there for return to health. And so, within this context, we'd like to really talk about how things are evolving very quickly, becoming very personal on a number of levels, and really be able to help to shape people's thinking and recognizing some of those risks and obstacles and being able to behave in this brave new world that's being established. The future's here.
Is this a situation where people need to take charge of their own health care, or is it more of an advocacy for sort of more of a joint management of your health care where your primary physician will assist you in certain areas? If you need specialized care, you can move in that direction. If it's a pharmaceutical or other product, you could lean towards those types of providers so that it's a more holistic approach, even recognizing the tremendous strides we've made over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic that impinges on the idea too of ethics in healthcare. And that's really the idea of therapies and shared decision making. So shared decision making is something that I've seen more and more of over the past 20 years, certainly in the past 10 to 15 years, where it's really an approach where the clinician, so your healthcare provider, and the patient share the best available evidence when faced with the task of making decisions. And patients are supported to consider their options, and they're being helped along to achieve their informed preferences. And I think it's interesting because some individuals love the shared decision making as a paradigm, and I think others hate it. They go to a healthcare provider to get an answer and a solution, and not necessarily to debate on it and have to decide among a variety of options. It's really a deep thread to start pulling on here. I think shared decision making seems to be the most ethically appropriate pathway superficially. So you give patients the clinical data, the treatment options, what could be better than that? But then the issue that arises is most patients wouldn't necessarily understand the clinical data to a meaningful degree, and then they're helping to drive their treatment protocol while being armed with so much information asymmetry. So I'll plant that seed there and see where we go.
Scott, let me see if I can direct this next to you, at least to start to respond. It seemed to me that coming through COVID, we had a lot of very focused attention on one specific situation, which was the global pandemic. And we had governments focused, we had people focused, we had research focused, we had companies focused. And to my mind, it was a huge success, or at least a success, in developing a vaccine, which led to hopefully the stemming a little bit of the global pandemic. If that's a fair assessment from your perspective, can we build upon what we were able to do during the last couple of years, or was that, in your opinion, so unique it'll go back to business as usual?
And that's a fantastic segue in as we've laid out what we wanted to discuss here. Jumping to that, I think, is a very interesting way of looking at jumping to that topic, right? Is what's the good and the not so great that came from post COVID. So I think in broad strokes, what occurred in the context of the pandemic, and we'll just use that term from here on out, is that you essentially had a Manhattan Project level engagement where, except it was global, right? Not just Los Alamos. You had an entire contingency of every single variant in the healthcare space, repurposing, reapportioning their resources, their pipelines, their portfolios to include a potential for antibody development, for diagnostic assessments, go right on down the line. I can name a dozen customers off the top of my head that made both good and bad decisions to chase the brass ring, if you will, because that's what it represented business wise. From a healthcare perspective, I think we have opened a Pandora's box that has presented a tremendous opportunity to advance the healthcare paradigm for patients, caregivers, for drug developers, and what I'll call folks seeking regulatory approval. And we'll discuss some of those aspects in here as well. So within that context, I think broadly, when we look back at this 25, 50 years from now, we'll look back at it much like we did in 1944, 45, when we saw the world change significantly because it was forced to. There was a forcing function. And the good that's come out of it, I think, has been very good. When you start thinking about it, a vaccine being developed from the ground up in 9 months, that's a remarkable, really a remarkable achievement. That's the good side of it, right? The downside of it is there were decisions made about expediting those clinical research studies that have created some unease, some challenges in people's mindsets, scientists as well as the lay people. In that aspect, you can look right there and see on balance that could present some change. We also saw for the first time a lot of people making it personal in ways that, and we're not going to dive too deep into this because we don't want to get into too many third rails, but where, to Ben's point earlier, we'll call it data, good data, bad data, data is what data is, was utilized to advance a number of different conspiracy theories, external therapies, and validation of personal tendencies, proclivities. And so I think we've also learned that we need to maybe bulwark our healthcare framework with a cleaner, straighter, again, more stronger advocacy position that both the average as well as even the fringe folks who are out there seeking care can, especially in extraneous circumstances beyond just normal health care, like a pandemic, a significant or rare disease that occurs in their lives. So we'll touch on a bunch of those things. But great question. And in summary, yeah, we've had a lot of change. How it fleshes out is going to depend a lot upon responses across the board that we'll get into over the next couple of minutes.
I want to end by going in a little bit different direction. Over the last couple of years, I've represented a small rural pharmacy chain in East Texas. And I would go over every few months to put on some compliance training. And the last training, there was a new driver. And I don't know if this guy graduated from high school or not, He was that kind of driver. But in talking to him, I said, "Why did you take this job?" And he said to me, "There's lots of doctors and lots of people smarter than me in healthcare, and I can't do what they do. I can take people their medicine. And every day I take people who can't get out their medicine. And it may be a small role, but it's my role. And I get to be a part of something much larger and more important than me." And I heard that from several people who were working the front till, and they were incredibly passionate about being a part of what they see as a service industry in the healthcare space. And I know you guys have very different roles and you're very passionate about what you do professionally. But with that sort of passion, really, is that something in your work with your colleagues every day that they want to come in, they want to be a part of something larger than themselves, and they feel like whatever their role might be, they're moving the ball forward just a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely see that all the time. It's easy to say, but when day one blends into day two, into day three, into day 300, everybody, no matter how much on the front lines they might be, runs into the day-to-day problem of just living, where as much as you might be literally a key cog in developing some vanguard medication, a COVID-19 vaccine, or a new cancer treatment, which has incredibly positive results in helping people to be remitted from or cure cancer. I think people still are people, and that goes into some of what Scott mentioned earlier about there's the behavioral side of things. So it's very difficult when you always want to bring the best of yourself to the fore, and you realize that you're also stuck in that day-to-day paradigm of just being a human. But it's what I've seen with my colleagues is it's tremendously refreshing to see people know that each and every day they're part of something like this driver you mentioned, pieces and parts of cogs that eventually all the cogs come together and form, a giant network and help society benefit. And I think a lot of the people who are doing a lot of great work oftentimes maybe don't even really recognize the extent to which they're helping many people. It's maybe humility baked into it, but sometimes I think they're so zoomed in on such a super fine piece of the structure of the whole that they say, "Hey, I'm just doing this thing." And you know what? That thing could be the next mRNA technology or cell therapy or gene therapy that is really helping people to live dramatically better or extended lives.
Great points all. And I guess to kind of answer in similar fashion, given our kind of varied roles in the industry, I work with a lot of startups, and the bar and the barriers to entry for startups with a brand new regulatory approval process, you're talking 5 to 7 years at best if things go well. It's not the opening a standard software data management startup. It's tremendous amount of investment, engagement, passion, belief. Generally, most of those folks are PhD or greater. D's PhD I'm working with right now, that level of engagement is not incidental, right? It's endemic to why they do what they do. And so, to your point, that passion, I don't think shifts a whole lot in that process. Your passion has to be about patients in this industry. If it becomes about the dollars, you're frankly going to find something else to do or go into venture capital and banking, the easy work, given the opportunity.
Gents, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted more information on yourselves or really to even maybe connect with you on any of the topics we've raised. What would be the best way for them to connect with you?
Scott A. Endicott on LinkedIn. That's where you can find me very easily.
Yep, I would say LinkedIn or Google search, best places.
Gents, thanks again, and I hope our listeners will join us for our next episode.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Tom.